Welcome to the inaugural faculty interview for the McGeorge Faculty Scholar Series. I am Michael Hunter Schwartz, the Dean of the Law School, and through this series, I'll be featuring recent scholarship authored by my McGeorge colleagues, and I will explore the relevance of their work to our day-to-day lives and to improving our society. I am here today with Courtney Lee, Professor of Lawyering Skills and the Director of Bar Support at McGeorge. Courtney Lee does it all. She directs the law school's very successful Bar Pass program, which includes both curricular Bar Pass courses and summer and winter post-graduation Bar Pass programs that provide one-on-one support to our bar takers. She teaches criminal law when we need to do so, and she's a nationally recognized expert on animal law, which is why we are here today. Professor Lee teaches animal law at McGeorge, and she has focused nearly all of her recent scholarly research and writing in this field, having published her last 3 law review articles on this topic. Professor Lee's work has been recognized by her McGeorge faculty colleagues. They awarded her the 2017 John G. Sprankling Faculty Scholarship Award for her article, The Animal Welfare Act at 50, Problems and Possibilities in Animal Testing Regulation. Professor Lee's other articles include papers exploring the ineffectiveness of animal cruelty laws and combating animal hoarding recidivism and the use of deadly force by law enforcement against companion animals. She has presented nationally on integrating animal law examples throughout the curriculum, and she reviewed and provided feedback on a criminal law chapter in a textbook with the same focus. She has served on the executive committee of the Association of American Law Schools section on animal law, and she is a member of the American Bar Association Tort Trial and Insurance Practice Section Animal Law Committee. She also is the faculty advisor of the McGeorge Student Animal Legal Defense Fund. Professor Lee is here today to discuss her most recent research and forthcoming article on factory farms and racial justice. Professor Lee, before we jump into your most recent project, could you tell us a little bit about how animal law became your predominant scholarly interest?
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me here. So I've always loved animals ever since I was very young. The first time I stopped eating meat was when I was 8 years old, and my parents took me out to have dinner with friends of theirs who happened to be ranchers. I grew up in the Midwest. And as 8-year-olds are wont to do, I really didn't want to stick around for the adult talking after dessert. So I went outside and was trying to play with the cows in the pastures. And I was picking grass and trying to take it over to feed them. And when the adults came back outside after dinner was over, the owner of the ranch said, "Oh, don't get too attached to him. He's going to be a hamburger next week." And I was mortified. And it was the first moment I really thought about what I was eating. And I stopped at that point. I'll never forget number 145 with a tag in his ear. And when I was a law student, of course, I still loved animals, but I really didn't get the connection between the law and animal law itself. That it wasn't a class when I was a student, but I had the opportunity to start teaching it once I became a professor, and it literally changed my life. And I began to explore more about the interconnectedness of the law and animal protection. And my latest research is now taking me down a path to examine not only how the law can protect animals, non-human animals, but also the human animals that are implicated in these industries as well.
Thank you. So in what ways do factory farms raise racial justice issues?
Well, there are a lot. So my current research is based more on domestic industrial animal agriculture, but my most recent article focused on a more international scheme and examining the impacts of factory farming and industrial slaughter on developing nations as well, where unfortunately is starting to gain more of a foothold. But I envision the effects of industrialized animal agriculture as starting with the farmers or would-be farmers and ranchers whose land has either been taken from them or lost through programs usually overseen by the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, such as heirs property disputes, that have removed their land and prevented them from becoming the farmers that they wanted to be. For example, in 1920, there were about 1 million Black farmers in the United States. And today, 100 years later, there are 50,000. So there's been a 95% drop in the amount of farmers of color and ranchers of color in the United States. So that's the first area where industrial agriculture has impacted people of color and marginalized communities. But other areas include the workers in the industry from the factory farms themselves, also known as CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations. Those workers are typically from marginalized communities, whether in the United States or from other countries who have come here as immigrants. Often they are not people who speak English as a first language, so there are communication issues. And they also are, the conditions under which they work are absolutely horrendous. Further, the workers in the slaughter industry, which is the next step in the system, are similarly from communities of color, from less educated communities, or perhaps from prison populations, prison work programs, and also immigrants and undocumented immigrants who do not have power to speak up for themselves. Beyond workers, there are impacts upon the communities that surround the factory farms or slaughterhouses. Usually, again, these locations are sited in areas that are already marginalized, where people are less able or perhaps less likely to try to fight against the system. And then the impacts extend beyond just communities to consumers as well. So the consumers, there are areas known as food swamps and food deserts, colloquially speaking, where food swamps are areas where there is a plethora of fast food restaurants and other unhealthy food options, whereas a food desert is an area where there aren't any healthy options available anywhere. So about 99% of the meat in the country is supplied by industrial agriculture. And in food swamps, most of the animal products that are available are ridden with hormones and antibiotic overuse and are very unhealthy for the communities. And obviously in food deserts, there are no healthy options for those communities either. And of course, usually food swamps and food deserts are found in more marginalized areas as well. Regarding the communities surrounding the CAFOs and the slaughterhouses, there's a little bit of a cause for hope, because there was recently a very important case decided in North Carolina that affirmed the awarding of millions of dollars of damages to neighboring communities of a pig facility in North Carolina. The initial award was about $5 million of damages, and it was remanded to reconsider that amount based on some logistical issues. And then the company, Murphy Brown, agreed to settle at a confidential amount with those neighbors, but they were paid for their travails in the contamination of the air, the soil, the water, the noise, the odor. There are many accounts of neighbors who experience literal excrement raining on them from neighboring factory farms who need to get rid of their animal excrement, and they do so by spraying it on neighboring fields as fertilizer. But of course, when one sprays liquid, it doesn't just stay in that one place, the wind carries it. And there were DNA samples taken of buildings within the area, and they all had excrement DNA on the buildings, and children couldn't go outside, and people were getting very sick. So starting with the would-be farmers, to the workers themselves, to the communities, to consumers in general, and arguably to the entire world, because factory farming does contribute the most greenhouse gases that affect our climate. The impacts are myriad from this industry.
So you mentioned the working conditions. Could you go into some details about the working condition challenges?
Absolutely. So there's a study, this is a nuanced area, but there is a study called No Relief that is really compelling, that it talks about how workers in CAFOs and predominantly in slaughterhouses are so afraid to speak up, to ask for something as simple as a bathroom break, that they will either wear diapers to work, or they will literally relieve themselves in their clothing as they stand on the line. The reason they do this is because factory farming puts profits above all, profits above human well-being, certainly profits above animal well-being. And the workers are expected to move at breakneck paces. The limit of birds, or not the limit, the line speed of birds that move through a poultry plant is a minimum of 140 birds per minute. And recent amendments have pushed for increasing that line speed to 175 birds per minute. The number of pigs that are processed at a swine facility is a minimum of 1,016 per hour. And if you're familiar at all with pigs, they are not small, they're enormous animals. So the workers are expected to process these creatures, whether initially killing them, which also leads to psychological traumas and potentially increased crime, but also processing the animals who have already been killed. And to do so, they have to literally use bone cutting knives, and they have to process these animals so quickly that it often results in injuries and amputations and sometimes deaths. But they are so marginalized in this work environment that they can't even ask to go to the bathroom, or they won't even ask to go to the bathroom. These issues have been highlighted even more by COVID, that workers are afraid to speak up. They don't ask for time off if they are feeling sick. And as a result, as you may have seen in the news, slaughterhouses have become some of the biggest hotbeds of COVID-19 infestations. Further, the workers are working very close together, and there is a lot of the injury and the cutting that is involved. So it's good that a lot of these issues are coming to more media light since COVID, but they have been pervasive for decades prior to the pandemic coming down upon us. Further, when the president at the time signed an executive order deeming that slaughterhouses were critical infrastructure, they were reopened, and the pandemic once again raged within their walls. There were instances of companies not providing protective equipment. These workers are some of the lowest paid workers in the country, and they were expected to buy their own masks and gloves and other protective gear. Eventually, most of the companies did start to supply some basic protective gear, but not for many months. Additionally, there's a well-publicized case from a Tyson plant where the managers literally engaged in a betting pool to see how many of their workers and who of their workers would end up getting COVID. So there's not a lot of heart in the industry, and the worker conditions are abysmal and very low paying. And the people who agree to take these jobs are people who feel like they don't have any other options. No one is born hoping or no one has a child hoping that the child will one day work in a slaughterhouse. And there's a lot of turnover, and the companies have been known. Some companies have been known to exploit that, to prevent having to consider an employee a long-term employee to provide benefits and other additional payments that otherwise they might be due if the employee does work for the company for a longer period of time. So there are many levels within that industry itself to how poorly the workers are treated, and to how harmful this industry is for those workers, who again are predominantly people of color, people from marginalized communities.
So you've laid out a pretty painful situation. Is this situation hopeless? Are factory farms just too entrenched? What can we do?
Great question. They are pretty entrenched in society. However, I do find a little bit of hope in a lot of the bills that have been proposed in Congress lately. For example, there's a bill called the Farm System Reform Act that was proposed previously and died in COVID, but has been reproposed again, that would place a moratorium on factory farms by the year 2040. And there's another piece of legislation, the Justice for Black Farmers Act, that also has been proposed this year, that not only would it seek to redress some of the harms that have befallen Black farmers in the United States from the USDA in past years, but it also includes incentives for more responsible stewardship of agriculture, for practices that are more climate friendly and less conducive to an industrialized factory environment. So those are just two examples. There are other bills that have been proposed that, if these bills were to pass, they would have an extremely beneficial effect on worker well-being, on community welfare, on environmental health, that I'm hopeful that our legislators will consider these bills seriously and will pass them. And I, for one, am certainly willing to lobby my representatives to do so, and I hope others will do the same.
Well, thank you. Is there anything else about this research project of yours and your work in the area that you want to make sure that you share with folks watching this recording?
I think the biggest takeaway that I have found is how pervasive these issues are to all areas of life. You know, the biggest question I get whenever I tell someone that I teach and research in the area of animal law is, that's a thing. What is animal law? And most people think it's dog bite litigation, which to a certain extent it is, but there are so many different areas of substantive law that are implicated by animal law. When I teach the class, there's a criminal law component, a torts component, a constitutional law component, a contracts law component, wills and trusts. It's all law. And related to that idea is that the laws that affect animal welfare, non-human animal welfare, also affect human welfare, especially in this area of industrialized agriculture. And I just attended a webinar where one of the speakers made a really compelling point that industrialized agriculture is not only non-human animals, but it's also crops. The vast majority of arable land in the world is devoted to growing crops, not for human consumption, but for animal consumption, which then will go to human consumption. And this speaker made the point that 1 acre of cropland, if used to produce crops for human consumption directly, could feed 14 people, whereas if the calories could feed 14 people, whereas if it were used to grow crops to feed animals to feed people, then the calories would feed 3 people. And of course, that's in a vacuum, and no one's only going to eat corn alone, but the idea is that if we were to use the land that we currently use to grow crops for animals, if we were to use that land to grow crops for people, I've read accounts that argue that could potentially solve world hunger. Of course, there are a lot of other considerations to take in, but the idea is that these issues are far more pervasive than just affecting, the people in North Carolina who have been directly impacted by the hog industry. That issue affects those of us all the way out here in California, and it affects people in Australia and Europe, all around the world. It is all intertwined, and these issues, the resolution of these issues, will help resolve a lot of our societal well-being, as well as animals and non-human animals directly impacted.
Well, thank you, Professor Lee. Thank you all for watching to the end of this video, and look for the next talk, which will be with Professor Leslie Jacobs.
Thank you so much.